In my outline, it just says general theater nerdery. So,
That's me all the time, 24/7.
Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms, symposia, or any fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51, Conversations About Writing with me, Brian Moritz. Today's guest is Quinn Rose, a writer and podcaster and the host of, among other awesome shows, Corner of the Sky and Setting the Stage. First of all, Quinn, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have someone to finally, again, talk theater with and talk Hamilton with. When I started this podcast, it was like in 2016, so it was like at peak Hamilton, and so it's kind of faded over that, but I finally got to see it this past weekend. So,
oh my gosh, congrats.
Thank you very much. Have you seen it?
Yes, I have.
Excellent. Where did you see it, just out of curiosity?
So I saw it about a year ago in New York, and I saw it 2 weeks ago in Chicago.
What was seeing it live, I have so much to say. I'm not going to spend the entire podcast talking about what it was like to see it live, but what was it like? What was it like for you? I know you're kind of a lifelong theater person. What was it like for you seeing it both times, both that first time and then seeing it again a second time?
I honestly don't think I've ever had an experience like that because I knew every single word going in, which, like, I've gone to see shows before that I knew really well, but nothing like that. Like, because it was like years of build up because I only saw it a year ago, so it'd been out for years by then, and so that was a really interesting experience. And it on one level was like, obviously I think that seeing it live would have been a better experience if I walked in not knowing the music beforehand. Like, that would have been just completely blown away extraordinary. It still was an amazing show. I still absolutely love seeing it live, of course. But I also just stand by my decision to learn every single word to that show, because on the other level, I feel like I had 2 years of enjoyment of it and on a different way, even if, like, ultimately seeing it live lessened the impact.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. My wife and I were talking about that because we've been listening to it, I don't know, like thousands of times, hundreds of times since before we saw it live. And I almost think like seeing it, knowing it so well, kind of in a way made it more enjoyable. I know what you're saying about not knowing it, but there's so much and it's so dense and it's so rich with stuff that I feel like knowing it, I feel like almost like you would have. I can see myself having been lost if I had not gone in completely cold and not known anything about it. So I don't know. It was just there are so many moments in the show that obviously you don't see being a cast recording. That just, I mean, I'm still speechless on it.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, what were some of your moments, having listened to it a lot but then seen it live? What moments on stage kind of caught you off guard, maybe, or blew you away?
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess a couple of really quick things that just stood out to me. And I'll be speaking specifically, I guess, about the Chicago production because I just saw it a couple weeks ago.
It can be either one, sure.
Yeah, well, the one that I feel like there's a lot of humor that isn't in the cast recording, but that is often pulled out by the actors on stage. And I think that you don't realize how much room there is for humor in that score until someone's doing it live and they make those choices. And so I mean, obviously King George is funny, but there were so many times that I laughed out loud that that's played pretty straight in the cast recording, but like on stage, there's so much room for that. So that was super fun. And then also, obviously, and then the other part of it is just being able to sort of enjoy things visually and like not have to, like, sort of what you were talking about, not having to worry about following the plot as much or following the words as much because you already know them, and just being able to kind of like look around the stage. There's 2 levels to the stage, and so there's a lot of stuff that happens like on the balcony that you would never know, but you get to see these moments of the characters. One thing that I just noticed is that there's a scene in which Hamilton gets a letter about Lawrence, and what I never knew is that Lafayette and Hercules Mulligan are also reading that letter up on the upper balcony and reacting to it.
I didn't notice that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Oh my God. And it was heartbreaking. I never knew that before.
I didn't notice that, obviously, and that's funny because that's not a song in the cast recording. That's like the one part of the show that's not on the album. So like, I think first time you focus on that, and you know what caught me off guard was "It's Quiet Uptown." And I know, right? I'm sorry if I make you cry during this, but like obviously that's a heartbreaking song on the cast recording, but to see that live, I mean, it was funny. I was fidgeting the whole song, and my wife hit me, tell me to stop. Afterwards, I'm like, if I had stopped, I would have just been a puddle. I would have wept. That song was so powerful and emotional in person in a way that even the cast recording doesn't deliver.
When they get to the song "Blow Us All Away," which is when Philip is grown up and starts singing, and then I just slowly reached down to my purse, pulled out the little travel pack of tissues I had, put it in my lap, and then handed one to my mom. She just held her hand out, and we just sat there and waited for it to get sad.
As someone who's kind of been around theater a lot, and you write and you create and you make a lot of awesome stuff, I mean, when you look at Hamilton as a piece of art and a piece of writing, is there what is the most kind of impressive to you, not just as a theater fan, but as a creator? What's most impressive to you about that show?
Oh my God. Oh wow. The thing about Hamilton is it's such a magnum opus, truly. And it, like, every single piece of that show is incredibly cohesive with itself. And it's this combination that I think that people like are so blown away by Hamilton because not only is it amazing, but that it was written by one person. Mm-hmm. And that he, like, obviously, like, he had very close collaborators and like the director and the choreographer and these people who had very strong influence in the presentation of the material and all of that. But it's still, like, ultimately everything came from one person. And I think that on one hand, our society definitely has this glorification of the singular genius that I think is inaccurate and unfair. But still, when you do see those, like, true life examples of someone who truly is a singular genius and is able to pull that kind of thing off, there's still, I think it gets everyone of just, like, I can't even wrap my mind around being able to do that.
So you saw Hamilton recently. I saw Hamilton recently. I'm curious, what musicals are you most looking forward to see that you haven't seen yet? Kind of what's on your schedule, or what do you want to see that you haven't seen yet?
Oh my gosh, everything. So a couple of definite things that are coming up, which I'm really excited about, is I just bought tickets to see Be More Chill on Broadway.
Very nice.
Been super into that show for the past year, and I'm going with a bunch of my friends who are also really into it. So very excited, just completely nerd out and go see that. I live in Chicago, as you might have been able to tell by me describing seeing Hamilton in Chicago. But I have a lot of friends in New York, so I'm going to New York, going to see Be More Chill, and we're also hopefully going to rush Hadestown while we're there. Either rush it or get standing room.
I have heard so much about that show. I haven't listened to it yet, but I've just heard so much about it, and obviously it just got nominated for all of the Tonys. I've listened. They had like a live concert version that the cast recording is out from a couple years ago. That's amazing in itself. I'm really excited for the full cast recording to come out, and I'm so excited to hopefully see it because it's supposed to be just phenomenal. So that would be great. And then also, I'm really excited because the band's visit is coming on tour to Chicago later this year, and I know basically nothing about it because this is one that I really want to go in not knowing anything. And so I haven't listened to the music. I just know that it's supposed to be incredible. And so I'm excited to walk into that and hopefully experience that later this year too. Awesome. So we're going to see Book of Mormon, which we've never seen, on tour. Oh, and we're taking our 8-year-old daughter. Totally appropriate. It's totally cool.
Bold move.
we have aisle seats, so we know which, like, during Hasadiga Inouye, we're going to take her out, and a couple other songs we'll take her out. But she's heard all the clean songs in that and loves it. And then later this month, we're going down to New York. We live in upstate, so we're going down to New York, and we're going to see Beetlejuice.
Oh my gosh, I've actually heard really good things about Beetlejuice. It seems super fun.
It does, and we got tickets because we love the movie and we love Alex Brightman. We met him at Broadway Con. My daughter's a huge School of Rock musical fan, and so yeah, we got tickets on that, and just we're like, we hope it's good, we hope it's okay, and then all the reviews have been like, it's super fun, it's super like quirky, and it just looks like a really cool show.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, I'm wondering too, like you've made a lot of your podcasts and a lot of your kind of professional work and the stuff you do kind of based on theater. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about some of the podcasts and some of the writing that you've done around theater.
Yeah, so I didn't set out and say like I'm going to do a lot of stuff around theater. I've always loved musical theater, but like really over the past couple years, let's say like the past 4 years or so, like it's just steadily become a bigger and bigger part of my life. And so, oh my gosh, 3 years ago now, I guess, I joined a musical theater show choir. And then that is sort of just tumbling down from there, and like sort of my whole life became about it. And that's so it's after that point that I chose to start Corner of the Sky, which is a musical theater podcast, really casual. And then this past, I say this summer, it actually came out in like February and March of this year. I did the interviews over the last summer. I created Setting the Stage, which is a narrative podcast, so a lot more intense, a lot more writing involved. That was the story of my hometown theater, and how it was founded and how it still exists today, 30 years later.
So, I want to talk specifically about that because I listened to that and it was a great podcast. I really enjoyed listening to it. And so first of all, just kind of walk me through that whole process. Like, where did the idea come from to do a narrative podcast about your hometown community theater in Maine?
Yeah, so this actually came from a directing course that I was taking. I minored in theater in college, which I just graduated in 2018, and my last semester of college, I was taking an experimental directing class, and we were reading about different sort of experimental theaters, experimental like theater groups in the United States, and one of them was Cornerstone Theater, and I was reading about them, and I was like, interesting, this seems kind of familiar, that's weird. And then I turned the page, and it was like, Cornerstone Theater went to Eastport, Maine, and I was like, ugh, what? Like, I don't, and I'm from like a very rural area, and so seeing like a town that I was like so close to me and so close to my heart in my coursework was very weird. And I like went in the next day, and like that's what we had to do, like discussion questions and everything, so like all of my discussion posts were about that. And then I went into class the next day, and I was talking to my teacher, Sharon Malkowski, who's an amazing director, and she was like, this is so cool, like you should do a project related to this. And I was like, you're right. And she knew that I had talked about doing podcasting, and I was sort of like, I did some stuff in the class that was sort of like audio based because that's more of my medium. And so she was like, well, have you ever considered making a podcast about this kind of thing? And I was like, Shara, you're a genius. So that's what I did. And I went home for the summer after college, and I interviewed a ton of people who were involved. I managed to interview a couple people who were in Cornerstone Theater who were not in Eastport anymore, but who just agreed to my cold emails, which was really nice. The whole Eastport theater scene, like I already knew a lot of people there. I've been involved with for a while, and people I didn't know, like I was 1 degree away from. So it's pretty easy to get interviews there, which is really nice. And it was also really cool because a lot of the people involved in that are quite elderly now. And so being able to talk to them about like all of their experiences going back decades with theater and with Eastport in particular was really magical. And then I moved to Chicago, and I spent the next several months transcribing these interviews and turning them into a narrative the best I could. And so every piece of it, I decided to do like a 4-episode arc, and so I basically chose the basic subject matter to be covered by each episode, and then I did each episode one at a time, creating an outline based on the interviews that I had done and outside research, episode dependent on how much outside research needed to be done, and then I wrote in a script to fill in the gaps between the interviews, basically.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to the run in show notes for this episode. And it was really fascinating. I'm curious as you were conceiving it. So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't know kind of like the narrative arc you were taking when you started it, right?
Yeah, it actually, I think it changed a lot based on my initial thoughts. Because originally basically the story of what this is, a little bit of context, is Cornerstone Theater is a still existent theater group. But what they used to do is they did these rural residencies, and so they went to different rural towns in the United States that did not really have theater there. Or had very little, and they would like build a professional production in collaboration with the community, and then they would like go on to the next town. And in the case of Eastport, Maine, that theater, after they left, the people who were involved in that production like all got together, founded a theater called Stage East, and that still exists 30 years later. And then the narrative that I sort of received from the class I was taking was that like Cornerstone Theater does this thing where they bridge community groups. And so their most famous thing was they did a production of Romeo and Juliet in Mississippi that like they cast racially across like the Montagues and the Capulets. And that was like a whole big attention grabbing thing. And then in Eastport, Maine in particular, it was this production of Peer Gynt. They made it about like a fisherman, and everything was very like nautically inspired. Is that a word? I don't know. Because Eastport is, as you might imagine, it's a fishing and shipping town. And they also like brought in both the people and sort of like the culture and the mythology of the Passamaquoddy tribe, which is the Native American tribe in the area, which is like they like literally neighbor Eastport. Eastport is an island. You have to drive through Pleasant Point, which is the Passamaquoddy Reservation, to get into Eastport. Like they're very connected. And so the narrative I was given to sort of get back to this was like Cornerstone Theater came to Eastport. They bridged these two communities through art, and they solved all their problems. And then now they have this beautiful theater that still exists today, 30 years later. Isn't art amazing? And then when I like dove, and I like had a knowledge to know that wasn't the full story just because I lived there. But also as I dove into these interviews, I discovered more and more like how complicated it was, like how that like the connection with the artistic connection with Pleasant Point like really was not maintained at all after Peer Gynt, or was maintained very little, more sporadic. That there was like divides in the theater itself, that this theater today is like not doing that well. They're still around, but they're really not thriving. And so it was how to build this narrative that I wanted to still be respectful and hopeful, and like optimistic, but that still was truthful to not trying to like tie a bow on everything.
That's always a weird challenge when you're doing a story, audio, writing, anything, when like the narrative kind of shifts under your feet, and the story you thought you were going to tell or that you expected to tell isn't it. It's not even like a complete 180. It's just like not exactly what you were expecting. Do you kind of remember a moment when you were writing or reporting this, probably more so, that you kind of realized that the story you thought you were telling wasn't the story that was actually there?
I think that came pretty early on, where like I think the first interview that I did, one of my questions was like, so what has the connection been with, like, what has the involvement been with people from Pleasant Point since that point? And my interviewee was like, well, really hasn't been a lot. And I was like, okay, here we go. And then another specific moment is the interview that I did with one of the members of Cornerstone, the first person who like basically didn't have a connection to Eastport, Maine at all, but just like came as a member of Cornerstone. And he described noticing some of the tensions of the community and sort of like this insider-outsider divide, which is not a racial divide. It's a, have you lived here for 3 generations or not?
Interesting.
And that was a real light bulb moment for me as well, because that is a huge part of the town where I am, and I think a lot of rural areas. And I hadn't realized like how apparent that was in the work that they were doing, or that like even 30 years later, that's what he remembered about my town. And so that became a part of how I was thinking about it as well.
And you mentioned the kind of a little bit about your writing process of writing the scripts out and kind of setting the arc up. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail on it and kind of like what exactly, like how you broke it down, how you wrote, and like how formal and structured it is. Because I feel like it's weird because like podcast, it's so much, I think a lot of people feel like it's like we're doing it right now. 2 people having a conversation and talking and kind of unstructured. But this podcast and a lot of the narrative ones are obviously very tightly structured. So what was your kind of writing process for this like?
Oh my gosh. I wish I could say that I had this great outline, that I really planned everything out. That was the intention. This project got pushed off a lot because I was moving, I was working multiple jobs, there was a lot going on. So I kept pushing it off, and I was like, oh my God, I got to do it. And so I kind of just jumped into it, having less done than I wanted to. Like when I was hoping that by the time I released the first episode, I'd have like a couple episodes done and have a better idea of how things were shaping up over the whole arc. I did not have that at all. And I think you can kind of tell that. Like the first episode is quite short compared to the other ones, because I don't think I got the balance right between like the amount of content per episode. But the first episode required so much research because it was a lot about like the history. And so at some point I was like, it's done now. I just have to release this. So, yeah, but to actually answer your question, I basically wrote out ahead of time, like the very basic ideas of what I wanted each episode to cover. And then episode by episode, I sat down and like was like, okay, this is what I want to cover. What interviews pertain to this? Okay. And like I said before, like I mentioned, I had transcribed all the interviews, which is a hugely necessary part of this process, and also why it took me so long to start. But that was amazing because then I was like really familiar with them, and I could Control F search all of them for everything that I needed, which is a huge part of my process through all of this. And so I basically each episode I was like, okay, this first episode is going to be about the history of Eastport and Pleasant Point. And so I like pulled the interview segments that were related to that. And then I said, okay, what do I have here? I put them in the best order that I could manage. And then I was like, what is left to fill in the gaps here? And then wrote a script based on what could connect those pieces the best. I wanted to be as interview based as possible. This is actually not as much in the first episode. The other three are like very interview heavy. But I also, so for me, the script was more about being able to cohesively connect those pieces rather than trying to like present like my own words over the story. There obviously is part of that. There always is. But that my hope was to be more focused on what people were saying.
And God bless you for all that transcribing you had to do. I feel you. I had to do that. I've done that on all my research projects. And like you said, it's necessary and it's so awesome when it's done. But doing it is it's the worst. It's the absolute worst thing I've ever had to do professionally. Sucks.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The great part about that, though, was because everything was already transcribed and because I scripted everything, is that I was very easily able to provide transcripts of every episode, which are on the website, which is a thing I'm like, just pulling back the curtain a bit, thing I'm really trying to do in the future and I'm moving towards doing with all my podcasts. But this was a good first step since the work was already done.
Why is that?
Primarily an accessibility question. I want my podcast to be accessible to everyone. And also just because, like, honestly, even though it's a pain in the butt to make the transcriptions, it's like better for me in the end too, because like just the other day, I was trying to find a clip of something I said in a podcast to include in a blog post, and I like had to listen to half the episode. And I'm like, you know what made this easy? A transcription.
Nice. I'm curious, what's in terms of the podcasting world or the storytelling world, what kind of stories are you kind of drawn to making and writing and talking about and exploring? What stories do you like?
Oh my gosh. Sorry, wait, clarifying question. So
what kind of stories do you like to tell, I guess?
Okay. I guess for me, like, in terms of content, I think obviously I'm very drawn to theater and arts related things. And I love those kinds of stories of seeing how people make art. And also stories, I'm also like a member of the LGBTQ community. And so I'm very drawn to like queer storytelling is something that I'm very interested in. I don't think I do a lot of right now. I just like make jokes on Twitter, but it's something that like I am been consuming more and more, interested in telling more of those stories. Not even this is, I feel like a lot of the storytelling work that I've done so far has been very personal. Even though Setting a Stage is not about me, it's still like, I told that story because it was a personal part of my life. And I'm interested more and more in like learning about things that are separate from me and the ways that people move through the world differently, and don't necessarily like have the resources to, example, make a podcast telling that story. But I could be a part of that.
I'm wondering, what is it about podcasting? I know you've done many. You host a couple regularly. What is it about podcasting that's so special?
On one level, it's just what clicks with me. I just love it. It's hard. I can't put into words why. On a more definitive level, I think that it's two things. One, that it's still relatively fresh. I think there's so much we haven't done with podcasting and with this really intimate audio medium that is being actively explored right now. People are doing such cool things with it, and I think that is really exciting. And then also just because it is so easy to take around with you. It's so easy to be listening to a podcast whenever, as I always am. And so I think it makes it very much part of your everyday life in the way that almost no other medium is, because no matter like how much you love to read or watch movies or anything, like that's something that requires stopping basically, whereas podcasting is on the go.
And I should have said earlier, you edit one of my favorite podcasts, one of my must listens, due by Friday every week. Such a good show, such a fun show, and I love your edits. Now that I know that I saw that you're the editor as I was getting ready. I'm like, oh, the jazz breaks. You do the jazz breaks. That's so fun.
Yeah, that's an adventure in itself.
So you mentioned this, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. I mean, what do you think we haven't done yet in podcasting that we can do? Like, where can we go beyond like the narrative storytelling that you did in setting the stage and kind of that NPR style storytelling and the interview conversation realm of it? What's next? What do you think we could do next in terms of content in this format?
Oh boy. I'm not necessarily on the forefront of this so-called cutting edge podcasting that I've mentioned. I'm more just like, wow, people are doing cool things. But the fiction podcasting that is already happening and continuing to develop is very, very cool. I don't know why podcast musicals are not more of a thing now. I really wish they were. There was a really like high profile one called 36 Questions starring Jonathan Groff that was made, which is actually really good. And so like getting into more and more weird fiction, like that kind of thing. There's lots of really cool horror fiction, which I don't listen to at all because I would never sleep again. But I know that like having an intimate audio medium really lends itself well to being scary. And so there's been a lot of really interesting things with that. And then there's just like experimental audio in general. Like I know the podcast Constellations is less of a podcast and more of like an art project, where it's a sort of a curation of strange and interesting audio pieces, and it's all distributed over one podcast feed, Constellations. And that is like the place to be if you want to hear like what are people doing with audio nowadays. Like it's on the Constellations feed.
Very cool. And it should have been clear. I was wondering, because I asked this because I know you listen to a lot of podcasts and you're involved in the world. And, you know, I do have fears about the future of podcasting, you know, the Luminary thing and everything that's going on with paywalls and locking it down. But I also fear that it's turning into, you know, a very, like the podcast, like podcasting is becoming like a format. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a very, like it's becoming a specific type, not just audio, but like a specific type of audio. And look, I make these types of audio shows too. So, but I'm very curious to see what else. Like, I don't want to see this awesome medium kind of get locked into this one certain thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think in one way that's the inevitability of all art. Like to bring this back to theater, as with everything in my life, like when you, like there is a type. And I'm just speaking about American theater because that's what I know, but just like there's a type of mainstream theater, and like when you go to see when you go to see Our Town and it's not described as like an experimental take on it, like you basically know what you're getting. There's like a realism, there's a sense of what that play looks like. And then, but there always has been, and there always will be experimental forms of that. There's always going to be immersive theater. There's always going to be really strange theater where you have to like smell weird things or like be part of the show somehow. There's always going to be theater that's told with no words or with only screaming or like and so would I love all forms of like would I love like all of the different forms of podcasting to like be on an equal level and receive sort of like equal mainstream attention and acclaim? Yes, I think that would be amazing. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think we're going to have like your NPR style podcast. I think we're going to have your conversational style podcast, and then like true crime. I don't know. There's like four styles of like podcast, air quotes. And then there's everything else, which is like truly what makes the medium like so varied and interesting, because there are all these different things. And I don't think they're ever going to be, unfortunately, I don't think they're like ever going to be fully recognized, but I think they are always going to exist, and they're always going to be able to be thriving projects, even if they aren't on the New York Times best podcast list.
I ask every guest I have, so I'll ask you, what's the best thing you've read lately?
Ooh, I like looked over at my bookshelf when you said that. Oh, I think the best thing I've read recently, and this is terrible, I made a podcast episode about this, but it's called Educated by Tara Westover. And it is a memoir about her life growing up in a survivalist Mormon family. It's absolutely devastating and one of the best books I've ever read.
Very cool. I will put a link to that in show notes as well. Quinn, if people want to learn more about your work, hire you, find all your awesomeness, where's the best place to do so?
You can. I'm mostly online on Twitter, unfortunately, at aspiringrobot.fm. And then also more of a portfolio style thing, you can go to aspiringrobot.com for my website.
Awesome. Well, this has been so much fun. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.